President Robert Mugabe, as we see there in the pictures, expected to hand over power after being recalled from the seat as far as ZANU-PF is concerned, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe.
All right, and as you can see right now, he's been flanked by army generals, and the very same army generals who've instituted a military coup and took power away from him. And the military is actually a very, very important factor in every country, Tabi. So not just Zimbabwe, but military is a very, very important aspect.
Speaking of the military, we heard the MDC leader Morgan Tsvangirai during the week speaking of the fact that in fact it looks like we've got live audio now. Let's listen in. President Robert Mugabe.
I address you tonight on the back of a meeting I held today with the nation's Security Forces Command element. This meeting, which was facilitated by a mediating team led by Father Fidelis Mkonori S.J. of the Catholic Church, followed an operation mounted by the Zimbabwe Defense Forces in the week that has gone by, and which was triggered by concerns arising from their reading of the state of affairs in our country and in the ruling ZANU-PF party. Whatever the pros and cons of the way they went about registering those concerns, I, as the President of Zimbabwe and as their Commander-in-Chief, do acknowledge the issues they have drawn my attention to, and do believe that these were raised in the spirit of honesty and out of deep and patriotic concern for the stability of our nation and for the welfare of our people. As I address you, I'm also aware of a whole range of concerns which has come from you all as citizens of our great country, and who thus deserve our untrammeled attention. Today's meeting with the command element has underscored the need for us to collectively start processes that return our nation to normalcy, so all our people can go about their business unhindered in an environment of perfect peace and security, assured that law and order obtain and prevail as before and endure well into the future. If there is any one observation we have made and drawn from events of the past week, it is the unshakable pedestal upon which rests our state of peace, law and order, amply indicating that as Zimbabweans, we are generally a peaceably disposed people, and with a givenness to expressing our grievances and to resolving our differences by ourselves, and with a level of dignity, discipline, and restraint so rare to many other nations. This is to be admired. Indeed, such traits must form the pith of our national character and personality. Yes, a veritable resource we summon and draw upon in times of vicissitudes. The operation I have alluded to did not amount to a threat to our well-cherished constitutional order, nor was it a challenge to my authority as head of state and government. Not even as Commander-in-Chief of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces. To the man, the command element remained respectful and comported with the dictates and mores of constitutionalism. True, a few incidents may have occurred here and there, but these are being corrected. I'm happy that throughout the short period, the pillars of state remained functional. Even happier for me, and arising from today's meeting is a strong sense of collegiality and comradeship, now binding the various arms of our security establishment. This should redound to greater peace and offer an abiding sense of security in communities and in our entire nation. Among the issues discussed is that relating to our economy, which, as we all know, is going through a difficult patch. Our great concern to that guide the operations of all its organs. No, that jump. Of greater concern, may I read this again? I beg your pardon. Of greater concern to our commanders are the well-founded fears that the lack of unity and commonness of purpose in both party and government was translating into perceptions of inattentiveness to the economy. Open public spurts between high-ranking officials in the party and government, exacerbated by multiple conflicting messages from both the party and government, made the criticisms leveled against us inescapable. Amidst all this, flagship projects already adopted by government stood stalled or mired in needless controversies. All this now has to stop as we inaugurate a new work culture and pace which will show a strong sense of purpose and commitment to turning around our economy in terms of our policies. Zimasit government remains committed to improving the social and material conditions of the people. Government will soon unveil an entrepreneurial skills and business development program which will empower and unleash gainful projects at our growth points and rural areas. Fellow Zimbabweans, we are a nation born out of a protracted struggle for national independence. Our roots lie in that epochal struggle whose goals and ideals must guide our present and structure our future. The tradition of resistance is our collective legacy, whose core tenets must be subscribed by all across generations and across times. Indeed, this too was a great concern for our commanders, who themselves were makers of that revolution, and often at very tender ages and at great personal peril. We still have in our various communities veterans of that founding struggle, who might have found the prevailing management of national and party issues quite alienating. This must be corrected without delay, including ensuring that these veterans continue to play central roles in the lives of our nation. We must all recognize that their participation in the war of liberation exacted lifelong costs, which, whilst hardly repayable, may still be assuaged and ameliorated. In respect of the party and the party issues raised both by the commanders and by the general membership of ZANU-PF, there too stand acknowledged. These two stand acknowledged. They have to be attended to with a great sense of urgency. However, I am aware that as a party of liberation, ZANU-PF has over the years written elaborate rules and procedures that guide the operations of all its organs and personnel. Indeed, the current criticism raised against the command element, but raised against it by the command element and some of its members have arisen from a well-founded perception that the party was stretching or even failing in its own rules and procedures. The way forward, thus, cannot be based on swapping, vying cliques that ride roughshod over party rules and procedures. There has to be a net return to the guiding principles of our party as enshrined in its constitution, which must apply fairly and equitably in all situations and before all members. The era of victimization and arbitrary decisions must be put behind, as we all embrace a new ethos predicated on the supreme law of our party and nourished by an abiding sense of camaraderie. To all this must be a general recognition that ZANU-PF is a party of traditions and has been served by successive generations who are bound together by shared ideals and values, which must continue to reign supreme in our nation. Hints of intergeneration conflict must be resolved through a harmonized melding of old established players as they embrace and welcome new rules, new ones through a well-defined sense of hierarchy and succession. Indeed, all these matters will be discussed and settled at the forthcoming Congress within the framework of a clear roadmap that seeks to resolve once and for all any omissions or contradictions that have affected our party negatively. The Congress is due in a few weeks from now. I will preside over its processes, which must not be prepossessed by any acts calculated to undermine it or to compromise the outcomes in the eyes of the public. As I conclude this address, I am aware that many developments have occurred in the party or have been championed and done by individuals in the name of the party. Given the failings of the past and the anger these might have triggered in some quarters, such developments are quite understandable. However, we cannot be guided by bitterness or vengefulness, both of which would not make us any better party members or any better Zimbabweans. Our hallowed policy of reconciliation, which we pronounced in 1980, and through which we reached out to those who had occupied and oppressed us for nearly a century, and those we had traded fire with in a bitter war, surely cannot be unavailable to our own, both in the party and in our nation. We must learn to forgive and resolve contradictions, real or perceived, in a comradely Zimbabwean spirit. I am confident that from tonight, our whole nation at all levels gets refocused as we put shoulder to the wheel amidst the promising agricultural season already upon us. Let us all move forward, reminding ourselves of our wartime mantra, Iweneni Tinebasa. I thank you and good night. Sorry, one or two places. I hope we can correct that. It's a long speech. Tatenda. Asante sana. Siyabonga. Tatenda. Okay, thanks.
That was an address to the nation by President Robert Mugabe at State House. Thank you for having joined us. Just leaves me to thank you for having joined us. From myself, Wadzanai Mombera, the entire technical and production crew will now take you back to our Pocket Hill studios, present viewing on SABC TV.
Those are the live pictures. As you can see, the credits coming from the Zimbabwean Broadcasting Corporation, ZBC, who bring us these live pictures. Simpiwe, as we see President, well, I'm not quite sure whether to call him former president of Zimbabwe, Robert Mugabe, because I think the words that most of us were waiting for was him, some sort of notification that he's stepping down. Maybe I missed it.
I think I may have missed it too, because the general expectation was that he was indeed stepping down, and according to Reuters, who named a very, very reliable source within the ZANU-PF negotiation committee, did say in confidence that Robert Mugabe has agreed to step down tonight, the 19th of November 2017.
And the stories, as you saw, we've been running throughout the evening as well, that if he doesn't step down, then impeachment processes. But that's what I think it's a bit. I'm not quite sure how to call this one so far. But maybe tell you what, Professor Dirk Coetzee has been following the events as they're unfolding in Zimbabwe. Joins us right now via telephone line. Professor Coetzee, welcome to SABC News. I'm sure you are listening in on that speech. What is your take on what has just unfolded?
Yes, I'm also surprised, as you. I think it's almost an unreal experience that he continues to speak as if he's the president and really nothing has happened. One of the remarks he made towards the very end of the speech is of saying that he will preside over the conference of ZANU-PF in a few weeks' time. Now, what we've heard today at the Central Committee of ZANU-PF is that he was removed as the president of ZANU-PF, and some other members also, and that will be confirmed or ratified at the ZANU-PF's Congress, Extraordinary Congress. But that does not mean that President Mugabe therefore can continue to be the president. My interpretation is that from today, in terms of, at least from the party's point of view, he's not anymore the ZANU-PF president.
So, Professor Dirk Coetzee, you're not speaking to Simpiwe. Since the ZANU-PF Central Committee decided earlier on today that if he doesn't step down tonight, then impeachment processes will then come in. So the whole transition or the whole coup has been quite peaceful at this stage. Are we likely to see blood being shed as a result of that impeachment process?
No, I don't think so. I think what is being done is that they have the initial action was taken by the military earlier this week, and now they are reverting to a more of a constitutional or party political combined with a constitutional approach. And for today, for example, the focus was on ZANU-PF as the political party. And incidentally, this whole speech tonight of President Mugabe was only about ZANU-PF. He never referred to his role in government. And I think from tomorrow onwards, the focus will move over to Parliament, where the real decision, the impeachment decision, will be taken at the latest on Tuesday. So I think, as I understand it, they've given time to President Mugabe until noon tomorrow to resign, and if that doesn't happen, then the impeachment process will commence.
Prof. Tabiso speaking now. As we said, we did not hear the words being uttered that he's stepping down. What I did pick up, though, from the speech, as you rightfully said, he spoke of the divisiveness within the party. He was somewhat reconciliatory at one point. Then, at one point, in a way, I think I heard him even saying he was not the best of leaders. He did take some blame in this. What do you make of that? Is it maybe Mugabe toning down because he knows that, well, the party's over?
I think President Mugabe is is such a politician that he understands the dynamics that's taking place at the moment. If you just looked at the screen, the TV screen, and saw on the one side the top command of the military, on the other side some of government people or officials, then the mere fact that the military was still so prominent there, to some extent still reinforces the idea that the military is still in control of the situation. And that what they are just very sensitive for the matter, that it is not in the end understood and interpreted as essentially a military coup. I think what they try to achieve now is for President Mugabe to resign, that it goes either through the party systems as it has happened today, or through Parliament. That will then, they will have the argument to say, but it is constitutional procedures that will follow. It is not a military intervention, and that will then conclude the process. But it is still, the military's presence is still very prominent, like we've seen just now. And I think they will continue to put a lot of pressure on President Mugabe, and that he won't be able to make a comeback. I think if we think back about a year or so ago, what happened in Turkey there with the failed coup, is that there the military did not sort of do what is being done now in Zimbabwe, and that is to make it almost impossible for a backlash or a comeback from the president's side. And I think this is what the military is going to continue doing, is to make it simply impossible for President Mugabe to make any moves. And that will ultimately push him into a position where we'll have to concede.
Now, Reuters news agency quoted an unnamed but very highly reliable source within ZANU-PF top brass and within the negotiation committee within ZANU-PF, and saying that the army was actually drafting Robert Mugabe's resignation letter. So, Professor, do you think what he was reading from was a resignation letter, or he just simply did not follow the script and was being his defiant self?
Well, if we look at the reading of the speech, President Mugabe was very disorganized, and he was fumbling between some of the pages, and it's clearly that it wasn't a well-prepared speech. It was something which was done either in haste or it was not done by himself. We will, I think, over time now hear exactly who is the real or who was the author of this speech, but it appears to me at this stage at some points of it was clearly under pressure. The concessions he made about the failures of government with respect to the economy, for example, the factionalism within ZANU-PF and the need to move beyond that. He referred to it as cliques. Now, that's the type of words that I don't think he will use himself. I would say it more or less comes from the military side. But I think what is, at this stage, he's still trying to see to what extent he can push the military. It's a type of brinkmanship that we are seeing at the moment. But at the same time, what we know is that 12 o'clock tomorrow is, in a sense, the deadline. If it moves beyond that, then ZANU-PF has another option available, and that is the impeachment one. But I think the first option that they wanted to see is if President Mugabe is not willing to resign on his own accord. If that doesn't happen, then I think the second option for them will be the parliamentary way of impeachment.
Prof. Kotse, we might just going to have to let you go in a short while, but just a quick one before we do. We were discussing amongst ourselves what could be the sticky points within probably Mr. Mugabe or President Mugabe finally signing on the dotted line. Is it a case of what is he getting out of it? Protection? Is not going to be incriminated, charges, etc., etc. What is your thoughts? What do you think could be the sticky points in as far as a negotiated settlement for his release be?
Well, I don't think what is in the pipeline is some form of prosecution for President Mugabe. First of all, he's too old. Most courts will say won't be fair anymore to prosecute him. So I don't think that is necessarily a sticking point. I think what it is about is what his immediate future will be, whether he will have to leave the country or not, whether there will be a secure exit for his family, all of them. Also, something which is not discussed yet, but Now, in many similar instances, there will be a quest by the income or the new government to try to recover a lot of the funds that have been accumulated by our outgoing president, that is regarded as a sort of unfair accumulation of money, of finances by him. And we know that the Mugabe family has lots of houses all over the world, including in South Africa. And I guess there's some aspects of that is to what extent the state will be able to reclaim money that they said actually belongs to the state. I think something else which might be is about, it's something which is not concrete, it's not tangible, and that is to what extent he will live in honor and with his legacy, according to him, intact and not being humiliated. And I think the main question that is now a point is, how is he going to exit without being seen to be pushed to resign? And I think what he tried tonight is to say, well, I'm still in control of the situation. I'm not going to announce my resignation under what is conceived to be pressure from the military specifically. So it's about, I think it's more about his honor than about specific material or other political aspects that is being negotiated at the moment.
Now, Professor, I think it's safe to say that President Robert Mugabe is now a lame duck president. I'm reading into the expulsion of him from ZANU-PF as party leader, and is now being technically the president of Zimbabwe. So, just how vulnerable is he at this point, given the fact that he's lost support within the war veterans, he's lost support within ZANU-PF, and he's lost support from all his key allies and comrades?
Yes, he is very vulnerable at this stage. I think we've also seen reports today that the different regions throughout the country have approved motions of no confidence in him. There's almost no support left for him within ZANU-PF. We all know about the decisions taken by the Central Committee today of ZANU-PF. So within ZANU-PF itself, there's almost no support left. All the support that could have been there, they have now been removed also with the expulsion of persons like Jonathan Moyo and others. The ZANU-PF youth wing have turned around radically now in favor of the military. So therefore there's absolutely no real support left in the party structures of ZANU-PF. What is left is only his constitutional powers as national president. And that is why the next target now is really to go through the parliamentary process with the impeachment.
Prof, here's a question then. Again, I'm going to go back to President Robert Mugabe. As we heard him, he spoke, the words he used, most importantly, I mean, we mentioned banning around the prospect of the army being involved. He did praise the army for the role they played in possibly fulfilling their constitutional duty or mandate, as it were, and with that, not, tearing down the country, not, what's the word I'm looking for, which you mentioned now, is the fact that they didn't disrespect him in the way that they treated him, basically saying he remained the commander-in-chief to this aspect. There's still huge, Mugabe still got a huge following in Zimbabwe, and it seems that he's taking it in his stride with regards to how he was taken, off the seat of power. And again, I come back to the fact that we did not hear Robert Mugabe come outright and say he's resigned. Do we make too much into this, or is it semantics? We all know that he's gone.
I think it is now a question about how he's going to exit, and how he's going to exit with honor in his own view. That he is not treated the same way as President Mbeki, for example, here in South Africa was, which was a clear-cut just recall, and he had to resign under pressure. I think President Mugabe wants it in a more dignified manner, and that he is regarded still as the founding father of modern Zimbabwe. So I think that is the approach that he is following. So it is it's more of a gradual approach of exiting. While President Mbeki it was just one announcement, he resigned, and that was the end of it. So I think that is the main one. But if we look at the real power situation of President Mugabe, he has very little power left, political power. What is left is only his constitutional powers as as president of the country, but without the political power, without the support of ZANU-PF as his main political constituency, is exceptionally vulnerable, and there will be no way in which he can make a comeback. If the military was not the one who initiated this transition, he could have maybe still called on the military, but that option does not exist. This is the first one that actually disappeared for him. So in that sense, he is exceptionally isolated now in a political sense, and therefore it is simply a question of time of how he's going to exit.
Now, Prof, I may be wrong, but do correct me if I'm wrong, but the sole reason that the Zimbabwean military did not declare this a coup was to avoid triggering the country's automatic suspension from both the African Union and SADC. Now, we all know that the whole world, including these two bodies that I've just mentioned, have been closely watching President Mugabe's address. Are they likely to act after this?
I don't think they are going to act because nothing happened tonight which will confirm the idea that it is a sort of a military coup in its crudest sense. Now, what we are seeing is a way in which the military is putting a lot of pressure on President Mugabe in order to vacate his seat. And it is similar to what we've seen in some extent in other countries, like, for example, in 1997 in Turkey. They call it nowadays a postmodernist coup, where the military also put pressure on the prime minister to resign. On the other hand, there was another example in 2009 in Madagascar, where the military did the same, but it became a much more overt military initiative to pressurize President Ravalomanana to resign. Something similar happened in the Maldives in 2012. And then some people refer to Burkina Faso in 2014, where there was more of a popular uprising. And then some will say what happened in 2011 and 2013 in Egypt were more classic military coups. And